Pāli Audiobooks presents Cultivating Inner Peace by Dr. Paul R. Fleischman, as read by the author.
Chapter 2. Peace is a Personal Encounter. Juan and Kathleen Mascaro. The possibility of a life devoted to personal peacefulness that then atomizes outward to others is conveyed from one person to another. For a sustaining image of such a life, I'm indebted to Juan and Kathleen Mascaro. They drew me like a magnet into their world. This is how I met them. When I was 20, in imitation of Thoreau, I set up camp alone in the woods and pursued reading and solitary wandering, trying to answer the question about the future of my life. What was worth doing? What could I do? I was already interested in psychology and biology. I read Ernest Jones's thick biography of Freud and was deeply impressed with the great psychiatrist's awesome inquiry, his relentless quest for the truth, his spirit of conquistador, as he referred to his determination to find answers for himself. But the atmosphere of Freud's world, with its stuffy European drawing rooms and its mechanistic model of mental life, seemed suffocating to a young man inspired by poetry and owls. Under the influence of Thoreau, I tried to read the Bhagavad Gita, of which he had written, "In the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial." Inspired by this extreme praise, I had bought a copy of this ancient Indian religious psychological poem, translated from Sanskrit into English by J. Mascaro. To my disappointment, I found the old poem superstitious and opaque. I focused on what was exotic and unacceptable to me, such as the description of birth in the next life being determined by the phase of the moon in which the person dies. And I quit reading it. I rebounded into something rigorously scientific, E. Odum's textbook, Ecology, which, along with its technical discussions of seed dispersal and plant succession patterns in old fields, gave me a sense of the integrated interdependence of individual living things with their surroundings. In an idle moment, I flipped open the Bhagavad Gita to a random page, and this time the text was clear. Along with some archaic religious passages, it contained an intuitive, poetic restatement of Odum's text. "See now the whole universe, with all things that move and move not, and whatever thy soul may yearn to see it all as one. Even as mighty winds rest in the vastness of ethereal space, all beings have their rest in me. Through my nature, I bring forth all creation, and this rolls round in the circles of time." Science and religion have a deeper, shared substrate. I realized that I would not be able to find what I was seeking by being a student either of religion or of science. I would have to live directly, trusting only those texts that thrust me out beyond themselves and carried me directly to an encounter with ultimate reality. That summer helped me set my compass towards an integration with deeper realities, such as I imagined I'd found in Thoreau and the Gita. Over the years, however, I collected numerous translations in English of the Gita, of which there are said to be several hundred. I found to my amazement that the poem had no appeal to me as a religious philosophical text, except in that first poetic translation I had read. Around 12 years later, I began to tackle the Gita in Sanskrit. The flavor, unmistakably, was the same as J. Mascaro's translation. Other translations attempted to impose a religious orthodoxy or a philosophical consistency on a fundamentally intuitive vision. I was not a believer in the Hindu Gita, but a disciple of its poetic affinities. While visiting a friend who was living in a Zen Buddhist monastery, I picked up a small paperback edition of the Dhammapada, a 2,500-year-old Indian Buddhist text. The Dhammapada previously had impressed me as a boring list of dry injunctions, but as I skimmed through the new paperback translation, it seemed to sparkle as never before. The translator was Juan Mascaro. I had always assumed that the translator of my inspired edition of the Bhagavad Gita was a long-dead Victorian from the era when Sanskrit was originally being translated into English. I was following the old belief, that man is so great he must be dead. But this new translation of the Dhammapada was only a few years old. On a hunch, seated in a canvas chair next to the wood stove in our Vermont cabin, I wrote to J. Mascaro, explaining how his translation had set me on a quest years ago, how I had poked into the Sanskrit and found the spirit of his words true, and how I had woven the study of psychiatry and religion into a profession I continued to pursue. I wrote that through his translation, I imagined I had heard scientific ecology break forth into rhythmic, poetic couplets of reverence and love. I sent the letter, care of the publisher in London, and knowing it was a long shot, pushed it from my mind. Some months later, an answer arrived in a shaky, small hand. Over the next 7 years, letters continued to cross the Atlantic. Juan Mascaro was in his 80s, slowly declining with Parkinson's disease. He and his wife, Kathleen, used their letters to speak of personal things as one does to a psychiatrist. I replied in kind. They described two birds singing at the end of a raw English winter. In the winter of 1986, I made a mad dash across England to meet Juan and Kathleen Mascaro. I was changing planes in London on my way to India, and so, with no time to wait for trains, I spent an absurd sum on a long-distance taxi ride. The driver, with mannerly British reserve, carefully interviewed me. I was spending a lot of money. These friends I was going to visit must be very well known to me. I've never met them. It was snowing. White lined the iron gate to the small, shrub-bounded garden, and white lay on the steeped, thatched roof of a cottage. Thatched roof. Kathleen opened the door and we hugged. As soon as I saw Juan, I began to weep profusely. He was tiny. His whole body trembled within the precinct of a three-legged walker. He put his palms together and said, "Namaste," the ancient traditional Indian greeting. He could barely speak. He gestured for me to sit down. There was a copy of the Dhammapada there. I read out loud from the page and verse he indicated. Oh, let us live in joy, in love amongst those who hate. Among men who hate, let us live in love. Oh, let us live in joy, in peace among those who struggle. Among men who struggle, let us live in peace. Oh, let us live in joy, although having nothing. In joy, let us live like spirits of light. There was only one fully furnished and heated room in the house, furnished mostly with bookshelves. Heat was a fireplace, wood hauled by Kathleen. They spent their last years together, as they had spent the rest, studying over and over the great texts of humanity, the New Testament, the poetry of Rabindranath Tagore, the Gita. A few years earlier, Juan had written to me with irony and earnestness, I have not yet read the Gita or Upanishads or the Dhammapada or the Gospels. Juan also had extensive, careful notebooks of his own words, which were clearly not intended to be published in his lifetime. The Mascaro's existence was trim, yet lush with personal love, concentrated, yet world-scanning. For Juan's translations had brought international acclaim, relentlessly serious, yet sweet and welcoming. It bubbled like a fountain with poetry, flowering plants, and days of quiet. In the obituary notice for Juan Mascaro in the London Times, British poet and translator William Radice wrote, his model was the Bible. He believed that the poetic and spiritual were one. He found examples in all the major religions and literature of the world. All his life he strove for a form of religion that was rational, poetic, and universal, and he worked with patience and precision. Every word was weighted with loving care. He lived quietly, reading deeply, and writing diaries and reflections. The serenity, humor, and warmth, and his ability to quote poetry at length and in many languages were fruits of a single-minded, spiritual, and scholarly endeavor in which many troubles were overcome. The grieving Kathleen Mascaro wrote to me, if you believe in human love, you must also believe in a cosmic love. Juan had written, whatever may be the events of our outer or inner life, we must ever have the peace of love. Even this sketch at the close of a man's life reveals the possibility of and the path to peace. We hear of a life lived in so valuable a way that in the final days, no adjustments are necessary. What was important then remains important now. We find adequate surroundings with minimal attention to physical embellishments and proximity to nature. In summer, rose bushes actually poked through their front door. We hear of open-ended study devoid of dogmas or expertise. Juan had once written, one of the tasks of education is to reveal the joy of the infinite. We experience personal love that opens and magnetizes seekers from across the oceans. we recognize concentrated devotion. In his first letter to me, Juan asked, "Can you believe that I have only seen television about 24 times? There is courage and acceptance of aging, illness, and death, and faith beyond content." Juan was not buoyed up by our literal fundamentalist belief in the Bhagavad Gita or the New Testament. He resided in and pervaded their faithful atmosphere. Restraint in mood and infectious, exemplary, peaceful joy vibrate through the whole story. In Juan's letters to me, he had written at the age of 84, "I have thought very much on peace lately, as the problem of peace is the supreme problem of man. Peace within us. The greatest definition of peace I know is in Isaiah. And the work of righteousness shall be peace." His concern was with the identity of goodness in action, righteousness, and internal psychic harmony, peace. Even in advanced age, he was keenly interested in the arms race. The London Times published his letter of moral outrage. He believed in a continuity of private spiritual life with global emotional tone. "We want an inner revolution. Peace is an act of creation, a harmony, and this harmony should be found within ourselves, our family, our village, our nation, our world." Juan's life and words were pointed towards one state of mind, which is the goal of all seekers of peace in any time or culture. "The sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee. But the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light." The man or woman who has attained this depth, like the prophet Isaiah, is no longer guided by passing events such as the sun and the moon. The material world is transcended. Another level of truth is known. External facts are not the final arbiter. An enduring brightness, an emotional pole star, a personal and invisible truth is now the source of vision. Inner peace is attained through discovery of the eternal within. Before I left their house on my madcap between flights visit in 1986, Kathleen had given me a tiny package that wouldn't be a burden during my travels. It was a present for my son. On my return, weeks later, he opened it. Her gift was magnets. Inner peace is a pole star by which individuals and groups can orient towards freedom from expansionism and divisiveness. Although population explosion, global degradation, and international aggression can devastate our Earth, the most powerful counterforce is the pleasure of serenity realized. There is a higher spiritual life, a life centered upon, resting on, an inner mood, based on unforgettable inner experience. Cultivated in the privacy of heart and mind, the life of inner peace generates autonomy from the demands and rumors of mass man. Focused upon values that emerge from contemplation of eternal time, it liberates people from thrashing in self-protection and generates a life of equanimity, harmony, and creative expression of those values in the community. Every person who cultivates such a life is a spring where underground waters emerge into sunlight. Such people provide a source of stability and purity within the surging tides of history. They initially suffer loneliness and self-restraint to emerge as waves on the ocean of transcendent hope and love. Across time and place, we hear their voices in chorus, expressing a unified, spontaneous, universal realization of truth, ethical sensibility, and care, rekindled moment by moment, concentration on purification of their own reactions, and a realistic, objective perspective. Pursuing the life of peace, stumbling and flying, I met others going the same way and was impelled to ask, what strange etching in the floor of the universe has channeled me to mingle with you here? Migration by magnets and stars isn't the sole prerogative of plovers. Find peace in friendship. Seek it. Fly to it across the world, even at a high cost. Peace embodied in memorable people imprints you to the path, creates a bond at that deep emotional level evoked only by personal encounters. Some of my best friends are yet to be born. Some died 1,000 years ago, and some are calling to me, although we haven't yet heard of each other. I'm writing this book to you.